there has been a nonstop amount of news that's come out around AI. And the first thing that I actually want to talk about is this article that started to trend on LinkedIn. And it's called Something Big is Happening. It was written by Matt Schumer. And the initial audience that he wanted to craft it for was actually non-technical users that aren't necessarily aware of the pace of innovation that AI is actually going through right now. And I think it's important for everyone just to read and absorb it. The amount of frontier model drops and the pace at which they are being released continues to accelerate. GPT 5.2, that was 72 days ago. Then 16 days ago, we got Claude Opus 4.6, GPT 5.3 Codex on the same day. 4 days ago, we got the beta version of Grok 4.2 and Claude 4.6 Sonnet. And then 2 days ago, we got Gemini 3.1 Pro. And the benchmarks just continue to get improved on as time goes on. The token costs will continue to compress as well. We're also seeing, I think it was Sam Altman that publicly came out and said that 5.3 Codex was actually involved in its own self-improvement. Now, you can take it with a grain of salt. Obviously, humans are still involved in pushing these models forward, but we are starting to see human in the loop start to compress, where the models are a lot more involved in experimentation, debugging, and evaluations. And it's not crazy to think that that recursive self-improvement trend will continue to grow and ultimately be what drives us into the singularity, where we get to a point where these frontier models are releasing on a weekly and then ultimately daily basis. There'll be some other constraints. We can talk about energy constraints that could hold back a lot of this innovation and chip production. But at the same time, it is just wild to think that, again, going back 12, 24 months ago, it seemed that we would still get these releases once a quarter, let's say, but now it just seems to be moving at a breakneck speed. The next thing I want to talk about is OpenClaw. This is the chasm or the adoption curve of all novel technologies, right? So we're in the early days of OpenClaw. It's only been around for a couple of weeks, and it seems like if you're on X, that's the one thing that you're seeing all over the place. We are still really in this innovator spot. We're kind of starting to get into the early adopters, but there will be this moment where we cross the chasm. And I think what was interesting is, obviously you saw the name changes where it was ClaudeBot, then MaltBot, and then OpenClaw, and then now we just heard about the acquihire, if you will, where OpenClaw is now going to be put into a public foundation that's going to be funded by OpenAI. And I think this is ultimately where we will see this cross the chasm moment. And for those that have tinkered and started to experiment with OpenClaw, I bought a Mac Mini. I currently have my own OpenClaw set up in its own sandbox environment where it has access to its own computer. To get out of this innovator's place and kind of get into this early majority, it will be a frontier lab. And I think all of them will start to release their own forked versions of OpenClaw with the guardrails that they'll create around their consumer app. I can imagine over the next few months, we are going to see versions of OpenClaw, or at least a lot of these consumer apps, be more agentic and be able to take more actions and have access to more. So the risk landscape may start to accelerate as well, but I just think it was a breakthrough moment when we saw OpenClaw come through. I also want to bring up this quote because I found this to be a really accurate prediction, where the CEO of Anthropic actually said at the tail end of 2025 that he believes in 2026 we will have a single person company to reach a $1 billion valuation. And I believe OpenClaw will be a foundation that will allow so many entrepreneurs to actually take on large scale organizations. What is it? What makes it so unique? Comparing it to something like Claude Code, which could do long duration tasks the same way that kind of OpenClaw can. There's a really interesting post that Andre Kaprathi made, and I encourage everyone to follow him on X and read this post in its entirety. I brought it to Grok and I just asked it to kind of summarize his view, but he kind of describes the tech stack as ultimately being the base, which is LLMs, and then we have our LLM powered agents, and then we now have this claw layer, which almost feels like a fresh orchestration layer on top of the agents. And I think that's really what makes it feel special, is that it's always on, it's always persistent, it's doing stuff in the background. And although there are security risks, no doubt, its ability to be plugged into nearly everything, so anything that has a CLI or an API it can actually tap into, has really what opened up people's minds to start to believe that this has been the story that we were sold on when we heard about AI. When you start to experiment with OpenClaw, you start to realize it can do everything that a human can do on a computer, period. And so when you start to break that down, what does that actually mean in practice? This could be the level of disruption where a single founder could take on an employer or a company with 50,000 employees with 50,000 agents, and you probably need even less than that. And these agents will work nonstop, 24/7. They'll be persistent, they'll be self-improving, they'll keep getting better as the underlying LLM continues to improve. and the cost will continue to compress. You could run the actual models locally. So when we think of the Chinese open source models like Kimi K 2.5, and I believe DeepSeek is launching DeepSeek 4, which should be coming out soon. A lot of them are being optimized now for benchmarks around tool use. So it'll be very interesting to see how large-scale organizations adopt, because so much of their workflows and their operations are human-centric. And so it will be very disruptive for them to either make a radical shift and bet on something like OpenClaw, like employees, or ultimately it will be disruptors and founders that actually start companies from scratch that are OpenClaw first, that will have the upper hand and be able to disrupt and take on operations that are 10x, 1000x their size purely with OpenClaw agents. So I think it's a really unique moment in time. If you're on the fence about doing anything with AI, if you're watching this channel, you probably are thinking about AI all the time. I just think it's so worth your while to go all in with OpenClaw. If you can set it up with a virtual computer or get a Mac Mini or another mini PC, I just think it's so important to get an early handle on what you can do with this. And in my opinion, if you can start a business today where you're running OpenClaw as a substitute for human talent, see where you can push that and see how far you can take it, because I genuinely believe that this is the way forward, and the level of disruption here will be immense across every industry. And so get ahead of it, learn how to orchestrate these OpenClaw agents. Even if you want to do the basic stuff, like kind of the virtual assistant, I think that can be powerful as well, just to tinker and understand. And just keep in mind that we really are in this innovator space. We're starting to kind of get into this early adopters, but this is where most of the opportunity is going to come before we have this chasm moment. And look, I work at a large scale organization. We have 50,000 plus employees across our parent company. And I know how challenging humans are and change management. Ultimately, we become the bottleneck when you start to see what these agents can do autonomously and they do it better. They never get tired, they never get sick, they never need a pay raise, and their costs actually go down over time, and they actually get smarter as the LLMs improve. It will become a no-brainer where we're going through this next industrial revolution where, you know, if you look back at the first industrial revolution, we essentially automated away human muscles. And you know, you have things like the tractors that came out that were able to substitute human physique and power. Whereas now this next revolution that we're experiencing is human intelligence that's ultimately going to be compressed down to LLMs. And so I just think it's such an exciting time to be around. It's scary. There's a lot of unknown, but the one thing that I'll always come back to is this tweet, and that's really just to say that we are going at an accelerating pace. It's important to get on board, get ahead of it, just try to embrace it the best that you can. Focus on your sleep, diet, and exercise. I think that's very important to ensure that you have a high quality of neuroplasticity in your brain, so your ability to comprehend new ideas and concepts and adapt will be better than those that don't have those things optimized. And then just experiment, try to build, because the more that you play and you learn, the better suited that you'll be for the future.